What's up, everybody? It's that time of year. Football season's just around the corner. College football, NFL, we're a couple weeks away. And in today's episode, I wanted to jump into something that I know is near and dear to all of our hearts. And yeah, that's fantasy football. So I want to talk about today 5 tips to win your fantasy football league. Now, before we dive into it, I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm somebody that wins every league I ever play in, but I like to think I do well enough. And so here's 5 tips. These are tips that honestly I need to follow myself and would probably help me be a better fantasy manager. But look, let's jump into this silly little game that we all play. So the first tip that I want to get into to help you win your fantasy football league is the first thing, the most important thing is that you really want to pick players that are going to score the most points relative to other players at their position. So what does this mean? We're thinking about marginally how many points you're scoring relative to the other players that you could play in that position. So for example, the great example here is like an example is like Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce on his own isn't going to score the most points in the league from a running back, wide receiver, or tight end position. They're going to be probably running backs that score a lot more than him. There's going to be wide receivers that score a lot more than him. But the value that Travis Kelce provides is that over the long run of the season, he's going to score a substantial amount of points more than the average tight end. And what this means is how you win each week in fantasy. It's not by having the players that score the most points, it's that having players at each position that are scoring more than your opponent. So if you can win the tight end position every week, that helps you get to a higher score than your opponent every week and can lead to more wins down the line. So this is why you'll often see Travis Kelce's drafted at the end of the first round, the beginning of the second round in most drafts, is because he provides such a high value because he scores so much more than the average tight end. That's why like guys like Mark Andrews tend to go, second, third, fourth round is because he's also another top tier tight end. And is he going to score as much as a Cooper Cup? No, but at the same time, he's going to score a lot more than your average tight end. And especially when tight ends fall off very quickly, that's a huge bonus. On the flip side, this is a big reason why we shouldn't take quarterbacks early. Look, I've taken quarterbacks early. You can fall in love with them. In most leagues, they score the most points of any player position group that you start in a given week. But here's the big issue with quarterbacks is oftentimes a lot of them score about the same amount of points each week. Yeah, the drop off from Patrick Mahomes to, I don't know, a Trevor Lawrence on a given week is pretty substantial. But if you look at the top 10 quarterbacks, they're pretty close together. And on any given week, and Josh Allen could have a big game, Patrick Mahomes, and you're gonna have a different leader in the clubhouse. So that's why we really should wait on quarterbacks a little bit more. Is there's not really a ton of added value to taking a quarterback early. That's why you often don't see a quarterback taken to about the third or fourth round. And really, there's a reason for that. You should stick to that. Now, the exceptions to this are, Patrick Mahomes in his MVP season, Lamar Jackson when he ran for almost 1,000 yards and won the MVP. Those guys obviously had that incremental, that marginal value against other players of their position group, and they really return value to you on a week-to-week basis. But those are really kind of far and few between. Um, so moving on, what's the second tip that I think you should follow? And look, this is one that's really hard, but we've got to avoid often injured players. I think there's this saying that it's like, oh, that guy was hurt, but he'll get healthy when he's right. When he's healthy, he's really good. And yeah, some players when they're healthy, they're great. But the most important thing in fantasy is having players that play every single week. A player that's hurt often, that doesn't play games for you, that misses games, I mean, that's a huge negative to your team, especially if you're drafting a player in the first round. So, for example, players that I'm staying away from, and I'm not saying these aren't great players, but players I'm going to avoid this year, Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Eli Mitchell, even maybe a Derrick Henry. These guys are all extremely talented running backs. But if we look at that group of four, several of them have been injured not just last year, but the year before that. And they have this injury history that's kind of built up over time. Look, I I'm like everybody. I'm enamored with what Christian McCaffrey can do on the football field. When he's right, he is no doubt the best player in fantasy. He catches passes, he runs the ball, he scores touchdowns both on the ground and through the air. He's an absolute machine. But if you look back at his last few years, how much was he actually available? I think he missed almost the entirety of last year. The season before that, he missed a ton. Look, he's great, but if he's not available, he's not going to win you your fantasy league. And the most important thing when you're taking a player in the first round is you have to hit. And so if you draft a player in the first round that's not going to play for you, or that is hurt or out for a large part of the season, that's a huge negative on your team. You can't afford to miss that first round pick. So look, if I'm drafting in the first round, I might go a little bit safer, go with somebody that doesn't have that injury history. I might go receiver. Receivers typically have a tendency to be healthier, or you go with a running back, a younger running back that doesn't have an injury history that you can count on, that you know is going to be there on a week in and week out basis. Um, Moving on, the third, I think, tip that's really important to remember, especially in your serpentine, your snake drafts, a little bit pertains to our auction drafts as well, is do not pick a kicker or a defense early. I cannot stress this enough. That a kicker and a defense, if we go back to our first point, they're all a dime a dozen. I think randomly, any given year, there's some random kicker that comes out of nowhere to lead the league in scoring. A couple years ago, I remember Younghoe Koo was not drafted by virtually anybody and then ended up being the number one kicker in fantasy. So kickers, they all score about the same amount of points. The ones that we think are going to be really good, out of the blue, some other random kicker shows up and is better. There's just no value in taking these guys early. Wait till the end of the draft. They're a dime a dozen. You'll pick them up off the waiver wire. You can play matchups if that's really what you care about. But what's really important in the middle rounds, and this is how you win fantasy leagues, is you have to think of all of your picks as lottery tickets. Any given year, you're not going to hit on every pick. That's just simply not going to happen. And so if you can think about it, you're trying to buy lottery tickets in the positions that matter. So in running back and wide receiver, you're trying to buy lottery tickets and trying to hit the next guy that just pops. Think about it. Eli Mitchell last year did he was hardly drafted. He was coming into the season, everyone thought he was gonna be a third stringer, fourth stringer, maybe cut. Ends up being a top running back in the league. Now he was hurt a lot, but he still way outperformed his ADP from last year. And so you're looking for players like that. You want to buy those lottery tickets throughout the draft. Jamar Chase last year, did anybody expect him as a rookie to come in and put up, top 10, top 5 wide receiver numbers? Probably not. But if you spin the lottery tickets to get guys like that, eventually you're going to hit on a few of them. So I don't want to pick a kicker or defense early. There's not a ton of upside there, and you're throwing away picks that you could be getting other talented players that may win you your league. So just because it's an eighth and ninth round pick, you might think, oh, there's nothing I want out there. Take it. Take the pick, whether it's on a young running back, a young receiver, somebody that has a chance to pop. You're looking for potential in those middle rounds. You don't want to throw away potential in favor of the safety of having a good kicker or a good defense. Most leagues don't give a lot of value to a defense, so there's no need in drafting them early. The fourth, and I think this is a big one for anybody. It's do not be afraid of ADPs. Make sure you're taking the players you believe in. I know sometimes I have a tendency when I'm going through a draft, I want to look at, hey, here's the player I want, here's the player I really like, and I want to ensure I get on my team. But I say, look, his ADP is maybe 80 and we're at pick 60. There's no way I can take him. That's such a big reach. And I think this is kind of this conundrum we get in with ourselves is we worry about drafting players where they're supposed to be drafted. But at the end of the draft, what's going to matter? Is it going to matter where you drafted the player or the fact that that player's on your team? Well, at the end of the day, you win based on the players that are on your team. So I don't care if you think it's a reach by conventional standards. If you truly believe in a player and you think they're going to pop and they're going to have a great season, draft them. As simple as that. Just just take the pick. Look, for example, I'll give you a great example. Ramondre Stevenson. I absolutely love him this year. I think he's going to have a great season. He's with James White retiring and Brandon Bolden gone out of New England. He's moving a little bit more into that pass catching role. Even last year, when they had a very crowded backfield, he put up some good performances down the stretch. He's a younger running back than Damian Harris, and he's got a great skill set. I'm drafting him probably earlier than he needs to go. That look, his ADP I think is something like the seventh, eighth, ninth round. I'm gonna take him earlier. I believe in him, and I want to make sure he's on my team because I have a feeling he's one of those lottery tickets that can pan out very well for your team. So the point is just don't be afraid to quote unquote reach. Take the players you believe in. If you believe in them, there's a reason for that. And that moves on to our last one is one, do your research and be flexible. So as I alluded to earlier, if you do your research, you may have more information than your colleagues and your peers in the league about a certain player. Trust that research. Trust your knowledge. If you know more than the average person, that's good. And that's okay if you do draft somebody above their ADP because you have more knowledge about that player than the average person does. So I think that's the number one thing. Come into the draft and have a plan. Have a plan of, hey, here are generally the players I like and here are the players I don't like. Look, I'll usually go into a draft and I'll knock off the board. I'll knock off some of the top players that I just will not draft. Like I said, Christian McCaffrey, Eli Mitchell, those guys I'm not drafting this year. With their injury history, I know they're great, and yes, they could have an amazing season, but the risk is just too high for me. Look, it might pan out famously, but if they're hurt and they're not playing, I'm not going to win. Simple as that. So, look, I have a list of players that I won't draft, and then also have a list of players that I really want to have on my team. Like I said, Ramondre Stevenson's going to be very high on the list, and I might take him a round or two earlier than he quote unquote should be. But at the end of the day, you have to find players you believe in and get them on your team. And then that moves to the second half of that point is once you do your research, be flexible. If there's a player that you value really highly that is falling down the draft board and is there when you're ready to pick, make the pick. It's as simple as that. I know sometimes I've gotten in this habit of where I would try and plan out every pick of my draft and say at this position I'm taking this player, in this position I'm taking this player, and want to kind of formulaically outline who I'm going to pick at every position. But that's really where you get in trouble because a draft is very dynamic. You never know what your colleagues are going to do. I Some people are going to draft really smartly and some people are going to draft really dumb. I mean, simple as that. We have some colleagues that are going to take players that have no business being taken where they that are not going to return any value to them, and players are inevitably going to fall, and you need to capitalize on those mistakes by your peers. So don't be so locked in on, oh, I have to take a tight end in this position, or I have to take a receiver or running back because I already have, X number of receivers or running backs on my roster that I have to fill out my roster. No, you take the best player available, and you can always fill holes. Now, an aside to that, doing your research, the last point I want to make for you guys is don't be satisfied with the draft. You can absolutely lose your fantasy league coming out of the draft, but you're not going to win it. The most important thing you can do is make sure one, you're on top of your lineups every week, playing matchups, making sure you're starting an optimal lineup on a given week. But the second part of that is making sure you're always paying attention to the waiver wire. Look, you can set yourself up for great success in the draft, but if you're not winning the waiver wire as well, you're not going to win your league. So, anywho, I hope you guys enjoyed the video talking about fantasy football. Good luck to you trying to win your league. I know I'm going to be in 4 or 5 probably, and hopefully I will walk away with the championship in 1 or 2. Thanks, guys.